We are back with another episode of Scaling Robotics. This is a series of conversations with leaders at robotics companies who have actually scaled their fleets, and we hope to democratize their hard-earned lessons to benefit the next generation of robotics companies who themselves are scaling. Today we have an awesome guest, Matt from Pickle Robot. Matt, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here. My name's Matt Leitch. I'm the Director of Product Operations at Pickle Robot Company. We make green robots that solve some of the hardest logistics challenges, including unloading trailers and containers in warehouses. And so I've been in this role for a couple of years now. And previously, I've been in product at robotics companies and other sorts of operations roles in robotics over the last 7-8 years.
Matt has seen it all in robotics and warehouse automation, so super excited to pick his brain here. For folks who aren't familiar with the robotics world and the companies that you've worked with, do you mind giving a bit more context on some of the scale of deployments or customers that you've worked with here at Pickle or in previous lives at other companies?
So most of my background is in warehouse robotics. So currently that's importers bringing freight in from overseas and unloading shipping containers and trailers that are over the road trailers. We're unloading those both in distribution freight and parcel freight, which is really cool to see. And then in the past, I've also been inside the four walls of the warehouse where we're doing each picking, omni-channel fulfillment, that sort of stuff. So I've gotten a really wide exposure to all sorts of different warehouse automation environments.
You have spent and built your career in robotics around product operations. I think this is a concept that for most companies who haven't scaled their fleets and have consistent uptime and operations that they're not quite familiar with. I would love to hear a bit more about what that actually means, what that word product operations means, and what you think makes a good product operations team in robotics.
Yeah, so the way that we define product operations is everything that's required to complete the value chain after the sale. And so once the ink is dried on the contract, my team takes care of everything that's required to deliver that value to the customer. So that's deployment, support, maintenance, training, customer success, and a whole lot more, because we're really crucial in giving feedback from the field to our product and engineering teams. And so that product operations team is really in the trenches, helping to bring the customer along in a journey that makes them want to continue to buy and creates champions out of our customers.
Just in that description, you gave like a ton of different words and I guess responsibilities that product operations has. Sounds like you folks are kind of jacks of all trades, just solving problems as they come up and making customers happy. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, is it like every day? No 2 days are the same when it comes to product operations. How would you describe what you actually do?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, you're faced with unique challenges every day. Customers' freight changes. We have peak season. And so the most important thing for our team is that we're building solid foundations and scalable processes that make it a lot easier to do our job a lot faster. And so, nowadays we've got all sorts of AI tools that help enable workflows and create products and help us with presentations and really pull data to go not only investigate issues that we're seeing out in the field, but then also, again, going back to that value chain, help to prove that value that we're bringing to our customers.
So, you talked about deployment and then you talked about support, right? Let's say we have a robot that's deployed at a customer site and it goes down. How would you think about, the framework of how we respond to that, what we actually do, and then how we resolve it, I guess, in the end?
Yeah, so all of our robots are continuously monitored at our robot operations center, which is, staffed continuously. And so, the failure could come in through a series of different sources, which is either the robot sends us a signal, a customer files a ticket, or calls the robot operations center. And so one of the things that we've made a lot of efforts to do is to upskill that robot operations center so they can handle almost any issue that comes across their desk. So from the simple things where the customer just has a question to, a more serious failure in the hardware or something, our robot operations center really stands equipped to handle that, and either make a determination: is this hardware, software? Do we need to dispatch somebody to go do maintenance? Those things are baked into the process that we've got, and so you're seeing, for us, we're measured on mean time to resolve and mean time to respond, and so most of our issues are handled very quickly, and that's part of the contract that we make with our customers, or the commitment that we make to our customers, that we're going to be there for them, and be a partner in their success.
Is it fair to say that, a robot operations center is kind of like the first line of defense for a scaled robotics company, that you guys want to be able to resolve issues as quickly as possible so that they don't, I guess, take away time from the engineering folks, the R&D, who want to be focused on building products? Like, how would you characterize, you talked about mean time to resolve, but in general, how would you characterize what the direction, kind of success of a product operations team is?
Yeah, I think the robot operations center really for me is kind of the nerve center of our fleet, right? We kind of look at that as, or we kind of look at that on a few levels, right? The first level would be the robot, right? Is there something specific about this robot that we need to pay attention to? Excuse me. The next would be at the site or the customer level. Is there a trend that we're seeing in the types of freight that the customer is sending sending to us? Um, and do we need to adjust anything based on that information? And then, the third level is kind of the fleet level. What are the trends that we're seeing uh, in our product that we can use to go give feedback to our product or our engineering team?
And when it comes to giving feedback and then, also conveying value, right? You talked about how that's kind of the job of product operations, is to convey the value of the robot to the customers. How are you making sure that you can translate between all those different folks, and I guess, yeah, have really clear signal when it comes to reporting from, I guess, that first line of seeing what the robots are actually doing?
Yeah, I think this is where partnering with your customer is really key. Um, in a lot of instances, this robot is one of the first pieces of automation, and almost certainly the most advanced piece of automation that's in the warehouse. And so, doing the education early in the deployment, and doing training with not only the end user but the shift supervisors who are going to be kind of managing the robots at a higher level, is really important, because then that'll feed into getting really solid, ticket quality. That's a big thing. Uh, it's hard to know what's wrong if the ticket just said robot did bad, but it's a lot easier if we say, here's the specific system that has failed, and here's the error message that we got. And so, yeah, I think partnering with your customer is a really important thing, and just being able to have a good open channel of communication. I'll get calls. Our robot operations center will get calls, and so for us, that's really critical.
So, really cool to hear, kind of on the product operation side, what that actually means, and what you, from your seat as an executive, are focused on. Want to turn back time a bit and just hear a bit more about your background, and how you came here or got here. I think you have a bit of an unconventional background compared to maybe other folks in robotics, going through the military and that shaping you. Can you tell me about what that experience in the military kind of taught you about your role today, and how you approach operations?
Yeah, I think, I'm in robotics because I think it's a really interesting problem set. And warehouse robotics is kind of the best application of that right now. And so that's super interesting. My background, yeah, like you said, I came up in the military. I was a helicopter pilot and troop commander, um, you know, back a long time ago now. But some of the things that really, come out of military experience is the operational planning, that management level, and I think that really helps me think about system level improvements, doing, having good scalable and repeatable processes, One of my favorite roles in the military was the coolest title I've ever had, which is called Battle Captain. And so what you're doing is you're sitting in a tactical operations center that has, a bunch of screens up there, and you're continuously observing all the missions that are going on. And you're helping to direct assets and make decisions and even authorize the use of force, that sort of thing. And so, that really is kind of not a terribly different than what we do in the Robot Operations Center now, right? It's about how you draw stories or themes out of what's going on out in the field and then allocate resources appropriately to go tackle those problems in a prioritized manner.
I love that. Sounds like Pickle should just start calling you Battle Captain as well here. It sounds like for product operations to really be successful, it doesn't matter if you can solve an issue one off or have deliver one customer outcome. It's about building the foundations and the systems so that you can do that repeatably, so that you can run this playbook over and over with the next incremental customer, next incremental robot. Is that kind of how you're thinking about building out those systems and the frame of mind there?
Your processes that work at a dozen robots out in the field do not work when you get into hundreds and thousands of robots, right? The 1% problem at 12 robots becomes a really big problem at 100 and 200 and 500 robots. And so you've really got to think about what's going to break when the volume of data coming in, starts to go exponential. And so I think about um, every time we encounter an issue, is this something that might break at scale, and do we need to have a process for it?
Also, for the folks familiar with the warehouse robotics game, you also spent time at Ocado and Six River Systems in the past, and they've scaled their fleets at those two companies respectively. When you're thinking about now, like going to that scale from dozens to hundreds to thousands, whatever it might be, like, do you have any lessons from each of those companies that you still bring with you today in your operations?
Yeah, from Six River Systems, I really developed a great appreciation for those first line, responders in the Robot Operations Center. It takes a really special person to be empathetic to the customer issues and be able to tackle all the technical issues that you might encounter. And so, I was blessed with really good teams to work with when I was at Six River Systems that were handling customer issues. And they were able to, identify really good trends, and then, feed that back into the product development cycle, which was really cool to see. And that was a big lesson that I took away. Um, at Ocado, it was more of a product focused role. And so I think for me, understanding the workflow when you're developing a new product, understanding the customer workflow before you go and build hardware is also really key, right? And so we put a lot of work into, before we even started bolting things together, understanding what were the workflows, what were the problems that our customers were trying to solve, and starting from there rather than we have this technical capability, what can we do with it?
Being obsessed with the customer and intimately understanding what they're doing is so important. Um, now today at Pickle, over the past few years that you've been at the company, kind of have scaled from a company that is still kind of serving one-off kind of deployments to now serving enterprise customers. We talked about some of the biggest customers in the world, um, uh, working with Pickle. What mistakes have you seen other startups make when they start to try to break into serving customers at that scale? And yeah, how at Pickle are you thinking about avoiding those kind of traps that you've seen across the industry?
I'll speak pretty broadly here, but hardware is tough, right? You have expensive hardware that has to fit a pretty strict ROI at the customer site, and so understanding your unit economics early so that they work at scale is absolutely critical. It takes a lot to develop hardware from the ground up, and so the companies that are doing that right now, they need to have a really good path to positive unit economics in the future. You have to budget for things like maintenance and support, and so many other things that if you don't build the margin in at the planning stages, it's really hard to claw that back over a 5-year product life cycle or longer.
You and I have talked about some of the things that kind of eat away at your margin, right? When you're operating a fleet of robots. And I think one of those things that a lot of early stage founders overlook is maintenance. Um, Actually having to supply spare parts, being able to swap them in, and the man hours that it takes to be able to do that. What does it take to have a really great maintenance function when you're operating a fleet of robots?
Yeah, I think this is a really key point, right? If you don't design with maintenance in mind, it's going to bite you in the long run, right? And so I come from an operational background. I got a picture of what it takes to maintain a fleet of helicopters, right? And those are highly optimized over decades to lower maintenance costs, and it's still a ton, right? And so there are consumable parts, there are parts that are not meant to break, and so it really starts at a product and product design level. Again, before you're bolting anything together, you need to understand, how can I simplify this system? How can I make sure that it's easy to maintain, right? Even if it breaks more often, if it only takes 2 minutes instead of 20 minutes to fix that break, that's a lot better at scale. And so, a good maintenance team is going to get involved in the product design process, even down to things like, let's use metric bolts for everything, right? Let's not require our maintainers to carry 3 different sets of screwdrivers to make sure that everything is easy to access. And so, our team at Pickle has done a lot of work in making sure that the consumables are super easy to swap, and maintenance tasks are as quick as possible.
It's like literally thinking down to every single detail of, okay, if something breaks, visualizing what would it take for the technician to actually make this changeover quickly. And yeah, it matters if you have to pull out another screwdriver or you don't have it on hand.
Yeah, and we do rehearsals, right? Before we're even on site. Hey, this broke. This component broke. What's your plan to go get it fixed? And there's a lot of components on robots, and so every time we try a new one, we might learn some lessons and figure out, oh, okay, we need to keep this different spare part in stock closer to the customer site so that it's even faster, to get it on site and swapped. Those sorts of things. The prior planning becomes so critical, especially at scale, to make sure that your teams are trained and they know how to, do the maintenance, and that is documented as well.
While we're here on this rabbit hole, kind of have a few more questions. Something I've seen across the industry, right? There's kind of maybe a bifurcation of teams that staff their own technicians, right, in house versus relying on third parties, different networks there. Is there kind of any important decision making criteria when thinking about that trade off, or is it kind of a situation where at a certain scale that's when you switch over? How do you think about that trade off between in house versus third party technicians?
Yeah, I think it's mostly a question of scale and cost versus the relationship with your customer, and then also how easy is it to train a third party to do these sorts of maintenance tasks or inspections. If you don't have the documentation, it's a lot harder to do it. And so there's always a break even point, and it's also dependent a little bit upon the geographic concentration of your deployments, that sort of thing. And so it's definitely a kind of idiosyncratic decision in terms of, it might work here and not there, but there's a lot of great providers out there in the space right now, who are maintaining large robot fleets across several different customers. And so it's definitely an area that you're going to see growth as robotics deployments kind of diffuse throughout all sorts of different warehouse applications.
I even saw it even outside of warehouse robotics. Waymo just announced a partnership with some big kind of public fleet management company for their
Really?
autonomous vehicles. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
They handle, yeah, the operations, cleaning, charging, and I think like kind of their bespoke or their spoken kind of hub model. So yeah, I'm really curious, like you said, to see kind of how that evolves going forward. Uh, Last thing on maintenance, we a lot of what we're talking about, some of it is preventative, right? Like the product team is really thinking, being thoughtful about what it will take to change over quickly and making sure things are documented and standard. Um, and then we also talked about technicians and operating well. On the preventative side, how do you consider things like estimating useful life and stepping in, say, hey, customer, we think this thing has done 10,000 cycles. You should be aware of these parts that, maybe need to be changed soon. What does the preventative side kind of come in on the operations perspective for kind of maintenance?
Yeah. I mean, personally, I think preventative maintenance is super critical. So, like we said, there's consumables where you have an expected lifespan, and you have to be able to track that across a fleet with pretty good granularity. And then cycles are obviously very important. Run times very important, and so it's kind of a balance between those things. You've got robot arms that do hundreds of thousands of cycles without needing any maintenance, but down to the air filter, right? That's kind of governed by the amount of runtime, the amount of air that's blown through it. And so, being really, really clear about what's going to be governed by runtime versus cycles versus calendar days, those are really critical for making sure that your preventative maintenance is aligned with what the life cycle of each component is. And so, we at Pickle run weeklies and monthlies and quarterly preventative maintenance, and all of those are kind of calibrated to those types of different um, different cycle based or runtime based benchmarks.
Zooming out, thinking about what it takes to be ready to operate at an enterprise scale, what are some of the big things that you are thinking about in the future um, that you want to get right or general top of mind?
I think for me, it's making deployments as easy for our customers as possible. One of the great things that I see from our team is that we've gotten deployments down to as little as 6 hours from the time the robot arrives on the dock to the time it starts picking. And so that's a really quick time to value. And so, for our normal operations, if we can get the customer up and running in a day and they start to see the value immediately, that not only leads to a good first impression, but usually it means we have a whole gang of people gathered around the robot who are very excited to see what this thing can do.
6 hours is quite impressive, especially for how big and complicated these machines are. So you talked before about kind of how you want your customers to perceive Pickle, the quality of the product, the quality of the experience. How would you describe what that perception should be, um, and how that changes kind of how you act and operate?
We do want to be seen as one of the most responsive vendors that any customer has. And so, that starts early on in the sales cycle. Coming up with a mutual action plan, investing in the process together. One of the key things for us is the education. Often, robotics is often pretty new in the warehouse environment. Some folks have AMRs in the warehouse, or some advanced PLC stuff with conveyors, even an ASRS. But you throw a robot arm in the mix, and it just it's a little bit different, right? And so there's an education process that I do think is really critical. So our customers, you know, are really coming alongside us to learn this together. And so our deployment engineers do a lot of education, they do a lot of training, and those are key things that help bring the customer along in the journey.
I think the fact of the matter is that a lot of roboticists, a lot of engineers, have not had the same experience of working on the in the warehouse, working in operations. Um, can you tell us a bit more about kind of what you've seen their incentives be, and how you make sure that your team is really customer obsessed to make sure that you're aligning your incentives with theirs?
Yeah, I think customer obsession. You kind of hit on it. In a past company, I've been wearing my company shirt, walked into a warehouse, and had customers say, "You better take that off before someone punches you," because they're mad at the automation. um, and so I think back to that experience, and it is so important to really understand why the customer bought the system and not how the system is performing, right? You could be performing as well as expected or better, and the customer can still be frustrated because they don't know how to manage the system well. It doesn't align with their incentives. It's that classic, I would like to just go back to my previous status quo because it's easier for me. I'm comfortable there. And so you kind of have to manage that transition, do the change management, and I'll go back again to partnering with customers, doing the training, doing the education early at all levels of the organization, down to the end user, so that change isn't an abrupt turn in a different direction, but it's a managed progression to a new operating paradigm.
Honestly, that's a great litmus test, right? Like, if you were wearing the T-shirt, some product that a company uses, and you walked into their building, walked into their office, would they smile and be like, "Hey, you want to grab a coffee?" Or "I love using your product," or like you said, would they punch you in the face because it's like, "Hey, what you promised me, you haven't delivered."
It's a lot more fun when they want to go get a drink with you after the shift.
I love that. Um, so kind of getting to the closing here of this awesome conversation. Um, I'm thinking about kind of two big takeaways, right, for folks who are building out their product operations team. The first one is hiring. You talked about all the different skills that folks need to be successful in robotics product ops. When you're hiring for your team, what are you actually looking for?
Yeah, the technical skills are very important. I think that barrier is going to come down over the next years. Products like Miru are making configuration management a lot easier, which really helps me from a standpoint of not having my robot operations center spend as much time on configuration management. And so while the technical skills are still very important, it's really about the drive to learn new things, to take on new challenges or projects, to notice a trend and say, hey, I need to go solve this. It's important enough that I've got to focus on this for the next little bit. And then for us, like the willingness to get down and dirty is really key, right? Our deployment engineers are often stepping into containers to help sling boxes when they need to. So you're not always in the optimal conditions, and so I love my team when they kind of shrug off those challenges in order to make our customers successful. And so when I think about hiring, that's a key aspect of it. Is like, are you willing to learn? Are you willing to get down and dirty and experience what the end user is experiencing?
No ivory towers here. We're,
Yeah.
we're getting down and dirty. Um, and the second one is metrics. You kind of talked about how fast you can deploy, mean time to resolve. What are the metrics that you live by in a team for your team, when it comes to building a great product operations function?
Yeah, there's a ton that we track, and you hit on a couple of them: the mean time to respond, the number of people we've trained, the how quickly we're resolving issues. The real one for me is utilization, right? The customer's turning on the robot and using it and relying upon it for their planned production. That's a great sign because that means that we've integrated into their processes well. and they want to keep using the robot. So when they keep asking for more and more freight from the robot, that's a good thing, and we want to lean into that. And so some of the the burst pick rates, the highest rates we see throughout the container, a little bit of that is some of those metrics are a little bit vanity based, but if our customers are using the product and using it consistently, that is a sign of success.
At the end of the day, customers using product, that's what matters. Everything else, just focus on customers using product and loving that product. Matt, this has been fantastic. So many great insights on product operations, and we really appreciate your time. Before I leave you, one question. Why do you love robotics?
There's a whole lot of reasons. I think for me, it's a frontier industry, right? Like this industry is going to change the way we work across many different applications over the next 5, 10, 15 years. The whole warehouse is going to look different. In 2030 and 2040, it's just going to be unrecognizable. And so, um, the problem is not solved yet, and it's a lot of fun to try and solve that problem. And then for me, I don't come from an engineering background. Um, and so getting to dive into some of those engineering problems and learn on the fly, and get exposure to some of the most intelligent people on the planet, that's a really cool space to occupy.
It really is. If there's any shout outs or call to actions that you have, if the audience can help you, feel free.
For us, go to the Pickle Robot LinkedIn page, give us a look. We're always hiring, so check the jobs page. It's a great place to be. Like I said, we're kind of solving these frontier issues on the fly, in real world applications. Right, we're deployed in the real world. It's not demos. We're doing production every day, and so that is a fun place to be if you're interested in it. Please express some interest there. Would love to review some resumes.
Amazing. Matt, thanks again for your time and all the insight. Uh, Take care, and we'll see you later.
Thank you for the time.